A flight attendant ripped up a 12-year-old boy's ticket without asking a single question. What she didn't realize was, his father owned the entire airline. Tariq Delancey had never been on a plane by himself before. At 12, he was old enough to handle it, at least according to the airline's policy, and his dad's confidence. But that didn't stop his palms from getting a little sweaty as he clutched his boarding pass. His backpack straps were digging into his shoulders, but he didn't care. Inside was everything he needed: snacks, a sketch pad, headphones, and a folded letter from his mom. "Sit by the window and look at the mountains," she'd written. "You'll feel like you're flying over a painting." He kept reading that line. Again and again. Seattle wasn't home, but it was where he was headed for a 2-week robotics camp his dad had helped sponsor. He was the only kid from his middle school going, and the pride on his mom's face when they dropped him off that morning was still fresh in his mind. Tariq had followed every rule, checked in early, got his gate info, waited in line like everyone else. The gate agent scanned the other passengers through one by one, but when it was his turn, something shifted. She was standing there in a navy blazer, red lipstick that didn't quite match her tone, and that air some people wear when they've decided they're too important to answer basic questions. Her name tag read Colleen Dresner. She glanced at him, but not at his pass. "Are you lost?" "No," Tariq said, voice steady. "I'm boarding for flight 262 to Seattle." She didn't reach for the scanner, didn't look at the monitor, just tilted her head slightly, then said, "Where are your parents?" "I'm flying alone," he replied, pulling out the printed confirmation. "My dad already boarded earlier." That's when she sighed, one of those long, slow sighs that says more than words. "We don't just let kids wander up here on their own," she said, folding her arms. "I'm not wandering," Tariq said, holding the ticket out again. "It's right here." But instead of taking it, she reached for the paper with 2 fingers, scanned it for all of 3 seconds, and, without warning, ripped it clean down the middle. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. All he could do was stare at the 2 halves in her hand. "There," she said flatly. "Now you'll wait here until we figure out who you really are. I've seen enough fake passes in my career to know when something doesn't look right." The room seemed to tilt for a second. People in line behind him looked confused. A couple exchanged glances. But no one said anything. Not a word. "I didn't do anything," Tariq muttered, his voice starting to shake. "You're being disruptive now." Colleen snapped. "Don't make this harder on yourself." Disruptive. That word echoed louder than her voice. He looked around, waiting for someone to step in. The gate. The passengers, the other staff, even the security officer leaning by the wall. But it was like he'd vanished. Like his presence was a problem no one wanted to be responsible for. Colleen waved at a second attendant, a younger guy with a headset. "Can you call someone from TSA? We might have a situation." That's when the fear started to crawl in. He wasn't scared of flying. He was scared of this. Being stuck in public, singled out, made small in front of strangers without doing anything wrong. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a dismissal. His fingers closed around the letter from his mom in his jacket pocket. He didn't pull it out. He just held it like a secret. And still, no one moved. But just when it felt like everything around him had decided to ignore what was happening, someone was watching. The terminal wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. Wheelie bags rolled past. A baby was crying somewhere near the charging station. A businessman tapped at his laptop 2 rows away. All these things kept happening like nothing was wrong. Tariq stood there, still holding the torn edges of his ticket, not sure whether to sit down or stay standing. He hadn't cried. Not yet, but his eyes were starting to sting. The younger flight attendant, the one with the headset, looked uncomfortable. His name tag said Ryan, and he kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other like he wanted to say something, but didn't. Meanwhile, Colleen stood with her arms crossed, acting like she'd just prevented a major security breach, instead of humiliating a 12-year-old in front of strangers. Tariq tried again. "Ma'am, if you just scan my name, my dad's already on the plane. His name is Benson Delancey." That made her pause for a second. A flicker of recognition in her expression. but she buried it fast. "I don't care whose name you throw around," she replied. "I've been doing this job 20 years. I know when something smells off. I didn't lie about anything." "You're being combative now," she said. "You want to make this worse?" He didn't answer. Not because he didn't have words, but because he didn't want to give her anything else to twist. The TSA officer finally arrived. A stocky man in his 50s, chewing gum, wearing mirrored sunglasses indoors. He glanced at Tariq, then at Colleen. "What's going on?" "Possible fake ticket. He claims he's flying alone. Doesn't have proper ID. Getting smart with staff." The officer raised an eyebrow at Tariq. "You got a guardian here?" "My dad's on the plane already." "Your name?" "Tariq Delancey." The officer pulled out a tablet and started typing. After a few seconds, he looked back at Colleen. "We got a Delancey on the manifest. 2 of them, actually. Looks like Benson Delancey checked in about 30 minutes ago, and the minor was confirmed for UM service." Colleen asked, confused. "Unaccompanied minor," he said bluntly. "The system's clean. He's legit." Colleen's jaw tightened, but she didn't say much. Just stood there, arms still crossed, like the facts were somehow disrespecting her opinion. The TSA officer turned to Tariq. "You all right, kid?" Tariq nodded. He wasn't, really, but he wasn't about to say that to this guy. "All good here," the officer muttered, stepping back. "Looks like someone jumped the gun." But Colleen wasn't letting go that easily. Well, he still shouldn't have approached the gate alone. There are procedures. "No," Ryan finally spoke. His voice was low, but clear. "He followed the rules. He even checked in with me at the front desk an hour ago. I verified his ID and everything." Colleen shot him a look that could cut drywall, but Ryan didn't back down. That's when something shifted. Not in the air, but in the way people were watching. A woman sitting nearby, probably in her late 30s, spoke up. "I saw him standing there with his ticket. He didn't do anything wrong." Someone else murmured, "Yeah, this doesn't feel right." The spell was cracking. Slowly. Tariq glanced around, still gripping the remains of his boarding pass. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want a scene. He just wanted someone to look at him and say, "I see what happened, and it wasn't okay." Ryan tapped his earpiece. "We need a supervisor at gate C12. Now!" Colleen didn't say anything. She just stood stiff, lips pursed, still holding on to whatever pride she had wrapped around her authority. Tariq stepped back, still silent. He was too tired to argue, too shaken to speak. But the silence wasn't crushing anymore. It had turned into something else. An opening. But before anyone could say more or fix what had already been broken, a voice called out from behind the security barrier. Calm, direct, and unmistakably in control. The voice cut through the tension without raising its volume. "Is there a reason my son isn't on that plane?" Every head at the gate turned. He wasn't tall in the way people expect power to be. No broad shoulders or booming voice. But Benson Delancey didn't need that. He walked with purpose, shoulders relaxed, chin steady, eyes that didn't dart or flinch. He wore a plain slate-grey jacket, open over a white button-down, and no one would have guessed what he was worth by looking at him. Except Ryan. His eyes widened instantly. "Mr. Delancey, sir, I thought you'd already boarded." "I stayed behind to observe," Benson said. "We've had staffing complaints on this route. I wanted to see it for myself." He looked over at Tariq, still clutching the torn ticket. "And it looks like I saw more than I expected." Colleen shifted on her heels. "I wasn't aware you were—" "You weren't supposed to be," he interrupted politely. Not angrily, just enough to let her know he was running the conversation now. Tariq stepped toward him, finally releasing the breath he'd been holding since the moment his pass was torn. "Dad, you all right?" Benson asked. Tariq nodded faintly, voice dry. "She said I had a fake ticket. Tore it up." Benson didn't flinch. He turned to Colleen. "Did you scan his name?" Well, no, I didn't get that far. "Did you check the UM list? The tag on his backpack has a barcode that links to his manifest." "I didn't think I needed to." "You didn't think," Benson said, his voice still calm. "You assumed." Colleen's cheeks flushed, but she didn't move. Ryan stepped in again, voice a little firmer this time. He was checked in properly. I verified the status myself. The system flagged no issues. Benson nodded once. Then why was his ticket destroyed? Colleen's mouth opened, then closed. I'd like a supervisor now, Benson said, still not raising his voice. And I'd like this entire exchange reviewed on the gate security feed. That includes the moment my son was stopped, the conversation you had with him, and the exact time his boarding pass was destroyed. Ryan tapped his headset again. Already on it, sir. The woman who had spoken up earlier, the one sitting near the gate, rose from her seat and walked over. I saw the whole thing, she said. Your son was polite. He said he was flying alone, showed his pass. She didn't even read it. Benson turned to her, offering a slight nod. Thank you. Colleen's arms fell to her sides. She looked smaller now, still standing tall, but something had buckled under her posture. I didn't know who he was, she said finally, grasping at some kind of excuse. That's the problem, Benson replied. It shouldn't matter who he is. A heavy silence followed, one that didn't need filling. A supervisor appeared moments later, walking briskly, his badge catching the overhead lights. Mr. Delancey, apologies for the delay, he said, looking around quickly. We were just informed of the issue. We need a report filed, Benson said. And I want assurance that my son boards without further interference. Yes, of course. He's cleared to board. We'll issue a new ticket immediately. Tarek said nothing. He was still staring at the scraps of paper in his hand. Benson gently touched his shoulder. You good to fly? Tarek nodded again, but his voice was just a whisper. I just didn't get why she looked at me like that. Benson didn't answer right away. He looked at his son, then back at Colleen. She saw what she wanted to see, not what was there. The supervisor cleared his throat. Mr. Delancey, would you like us to handle this internally, or... I'll file my own report, he said. I'm not here for drama. I'm here for accountability. The words hung there for a moment, sharp but not cruel. But even as procedures resumed and apologies were muttered, something deeper had already taken root. This wasn't going to end with a new boarding pass. Tariq stood near the window now, away from the crowd, watching the tarmac while the gate agent scrambled to reprint his boarding pass. Benson remained at the center of it all, surrounded by people who suddenly remembered how to look busy. But he wasn't letting this moment pass quietly. Colleen had retreated behind the gate desk, pretending to double-check seating charts that didn't need checking. She knew eyes were on her now. Benson walked over, deliberately. Not angry, just clear. You didn't just tear up a boarding pass, he said calmly. You tore up a moment my son had been looking forward to for weeks. Colleen's hand paused on the keyboard. She didn't look at him. I made a judgment call. No, he replied. You made a judgment? Full stop. She slowly turned toward him, her mouth tightening. Are you accusing me of something? I'm pointing out something that already happened, Benson said. You made a decision about my son the second you saw him. Before he spoke, before you scanned his name, before you did your job. She crossed her arms again, almost instinctively. I was protecting the integrity of the flight. We're trained to spot inconsistencies. And your inconsistency was what, exactly? He asked. A child, standing in line with a valid ticket, quietly waiting his turn? Colleen looked like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to defend. The security footage had already been flagged. Ryan had made sure of that. The supervisor stood just a few feet away, listening, not interrupting. You know what the worst part is? Benson continued. You didn't think twice about it, not until you realized who I was. And even then, you weren't sorry. You were scrambling. Her face flushed again. She glanced at the supervisor, maybe hoping for backup. But he stayed silent. I've spent years building this airline, Benson said, his voice low. Not because I needed to, but because I believed travel could feel fair, inclusive, like you belonged in the sky no matter what your name was. And today you reminded me just how much further we have to go. Colleen stared at the floor. Benson wasn't done. You thought no one would notice, that no one would care enough to speak up. And most days, you're probably right. He gestured to the crowd around them, many of whom had resumed their travel routines. Some were still watching. Others had gone back to their phones and laptops like nothing had happened. That's the danger, Colleen. Silence. Not just from you, but from everyone who sees something and chooses to pretend it didn't happen. Her voice cracked just slightly. I didn't mean to, but you did, he said. You made my son feel like a threat, a problem to be handled, and no amount of customer service training can undo that. For a second, Colleen looked like she might speak again, but then she stopped, and maybe that was better. Sometimes silence is the only honest thing left. Benson stepped back, giving her space, not to save face, but to sit with what she'd done. Ryan walked up beside him. Mr. Delancey, he said quietly. Your son's new pass is ready. First-class upgrade, no charge. Thank you, Benson said. Not for the upgrade. For speaking up earlier. That took something. Ryan gave a quick nod, then returned to the desk. Tarek rejoined his father, eyes still wide, but steadier now. Do I really have to sit up front? He asked. I kinda like the wing seats better. Benson smiled, just a little. We'll trade if you want. The supervisor cleared his throat. Mr. Delancey, I want to personally apologize. This is not what we stand for. I hope not, Benson said. But I'll be watching. The supervisor nodded, eyes serious. We'll handle it from here. But as they began walking toward the jet bridge, what stuck most wasn't what had been said. It was what hadn't been. The silence from those who'd seen and chosen comfort over courage. The jet bridge was narrow, filled with that usual blend of stale air and humming lights. But as Benson and Tarek walked side by side, it felt like stepping into a different kind of pressure, one with consequences waiting on the other end. Inside the plane, the flight crew had already been informed. A woman in her late 40s, wearing the same Navy uniform as Colleen, but with warmer eyes and steadier hands, greeted them immediately. Mr. Delancey, she said, we're so sorry about what happened at the gate. Your seats are ready. And Tarek, if you'd like to visit the cockpit before takeoff, we'd be happy to show you around. Tarek blinked, surprised. Really? She smiled. Really? Captain's a fan of your dad. Benson placed a hand on his son's back. Go on. I'll be right here. As Tarek followed the attendant to the front of the plane, Benson watched him with a mixture of pride and something else. An ache, deep and familiar. He had grown used to seeing things like this play out, but it never stopped hitting a nerve when it touched his own family. He sat down in seat 2A and pulled out his phone. No corporate emails. Not yet. Instead, he opened a notepad and typed a message to his chief of staff. Gate agent at Sacramento Terminal C12. Incident involving unaccompanied minor. Security footage flagged. Request internal review and retraining evaluation. I'll handle the report. This one's personal. He hit send, leaned back, and stared out of the window as the jet bridge pulled away. Back in the terminal, the aftermath had already begun. The supervisor, Dean Rosner, stood near the desk with Ryan, now off duty, but lingering nearby. Colleen remained at her post, silent and still, staring at the screen like it would erase the memory of what had happened. Dean spoke quietly. You understand what's coming, right? She didn't look up. Disciplinary review, at the very least. Her jaw tightened. I didn't mean... I know what you meant, he said. But meaning something and doing it are two different things. You acted without cause. That's documented. You singled out a child, didn't follow protocol, and now there's a fire under us from the top. You've got a file now, Colleen. A serious one. She said nothing, but the weight of it was sinking in. Meanwhile, Ryan stood with his arms crossed. Not smug, not satisfied, just watching. You could have handled it different, he said. You had the info. The manifest was flagged. You just didn't care. Colleen finally snapped, voice sharp but low. Don't pretend like you've never missed something. I have, Ryan replied. But I've never shredded a kid's ticket because he didn't look like someone I expected. Dean cut in. All right, that's enough. HR will handle the rest. Ryan took a breath and walked off, not bothering with a goodbye. Back on the plane, Tarek returned from the cockpit, smiling just slightly. Dad, they said I could press one of the buttons before we take off. Benson raised an eyebrow. Did you ask what it did first? I'm not trying to launch the cargo door mid-air. Tariq grinned. Benson laughed, and for the first time that day, it felt real. A few minutes later, the flight attendants gave their safety demo. Passengers buckled in. The cabin settled. Tariq turned in his seat. Are you mad at her? Benson paused. No. Why not? Because getting angry is easy, he said. Making sure it never happens again, that's harder. That's where the work is. Tariq leaned back, quiet again. She looked at me like I didn't belong there. I know. I didn't like that. You're not supposed to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his mom's note, creased now from how tightly he'd held it. Still gonna look for the mountains, he mumbled. Benson looked out the window. You'll see them. And a lot more. Just don't ever let someone like her make you question if you belong in the seat you earned. Tariq nodded. But even as the plane lifted into the sky, Benson knew the conversation wasn't finished, because the system that allowed this to happen wasn't grounded at the gate. It was everywhere, and that was going to take more than one flight to fix. By the time the plane leveled above the clouds, the city behind them looked small, flattened into patches of light and shadow, like the whole world could be zipped into a suitcase and stored in the overhead bin. Tariq leaned toward the window, forehead pressed to the plastic. I think I see snow on the mountains. Benson glanced over. Could be Mount Shasta. Looks like powdered sugar, Tariq said. They both chuckled quietly. The tension from the gate hadn't vanished, but in this altitude, it felt like they could breathe again. The flight was just under 2 hours. Smooth skies, the usual soft rustle of newspapers, headphones clicking on, passengers settling into their mid-air rituals. At one point, a different flight attendant, Sharon, name stitched in neat cursive, approached with 2 glasses of water and a folded note. This was passed from the gate supervisor before takeoff, she whispered. He said it's for you. Benson unfolded it. Mr. Delancey, we're reviewing all recent gate interactions across terminals starting tomorrow. I know a formal apology isn't enough, but we'll do better. Dean Rosner. He folded the note slowly, slid it into his coat pocket. Across the aisle, an older man, mid-60s, silver buzz cut, worn denim jacket, leaned slightly over. That your boy? He asked. Benson turned. He is. He handled himself real calm back there. Most kids would have lost it. He's been taught not to. The man nodded, then glanced at Tariq. My grandson's around his age. Kids like him. They gotta be twice as patient, huh? Benson didn't answer right away. Twice as patient, 3 times as careful. And still, things happen. The man gave a knowing nod, then sat back in his seat. He didn't say another word for the rest of the flight. He didn't need to. Tariq stretched his legs and yawned. Will they fire her? I don't know, Benson replied. Do you want them to? No, he said. I want them to understand why it matters. Why it always mattered. People don't learn when you just erase them. They learn when they're forced to see what they couldn't before. Tariq looked down at his sketchpad, finally opening it for the first time since boarding. He started to draw. Mountains, clouds, a long plane slicing across the sky. You think she'll remember this? He asked. I think it'll follow her, Benson said. Good. They didn't talk much for the rest of the flight, but the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It held something else. Understanding, maybe. Or just the relief of being past the worst part. When they landed in Seattle, the cabin filled with the usual sounds. Seatbelts clicking, overhead bins popping open, voices stretching from hours of stillness. At the front of the plane, a member of airport staff waited with a small sign that read, Unaccompanied minor, Tariq Delancey. Protocol. As they exited, Benson placed a hand on his son's shoulder. I'll see you in 2 weeks. You flying out to pick me up? Wouldn't miss it. Tariq grinned and grabbed his bag. Sharon smiled at both of them. Have a great camp, young man. Thanks, Tariq said, then glanced at Benson. Love you. Love you too. As he watched his son disappear into the terminal with the escort, Benson felt the full weight of the day settle on his chest. Not in a way that crushed him, but in a way that reminded him why he built this airline in the first place. Because flying, for some people, was just transportation. But for others, it was a battlefield. One where being polite didn't always protect you. Where silence let things rot. And where even the skies weren't neutral. But what Benson knew, what he had taught Tariq to believe, was that the right thing doesn't stop being right just because it's inconvenient. 2 days after the flight, Benson sat in his office on the 22nd floor of a high-rise in downtown Oakland. The windows behind him gave a wide view of the bay, the bridge stretching in the distance, fog curling like fingers around the skyline. But Benson wasn't looking outside. He was rereading an email. One from Dean Rosner. Mr. Delancey, Colleen Dresner has been placed on administrative leave pending full review. As per your recommendation, we are launching a system-wide training initiative focused on bias recognition, de-escalation, and youth passenger engagement. I appreciate your restraint and your reminder that accountability is more than punishment. Sincerely, Dean. He closed the message and leaned back in his chair. There wasn't any joy in it, no satisfaction in being right. But there was a quiet steadiness that came from knowing something had shifted. Not everything, but something. His assistant knocked and peeked in. You've got your 2:30 with the legal team, and a voicemail from the Sacramento gate rep. She said a woman stopped by asking for a meeting with you. Name? Colleen Dresner. He sighed. Set it for next week. 10 minutes. No longer. Will do. When she closed the door, Benson reached into his pocket and pulled out Tariq's boarding pass, or what was left of it. He'd kept the torn halves. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. A real one. Paper thin, but heavy with meaning. Later that evening, Tariq called from camp. They let us build drones today, he said. Mine flew straight into a tree. Benson chuckled. At least it took off. Yeah. I'll send you a picture when I get it out of the branches. How's everything else? Tariq paused. Good. But guess what? What? There's this other kid from Texas. He asked me what I want to be when I grow up. I told him I don't know. He said, you look like you're gonna run stuff one day. Benson smiled. He's not wrong. I didn't feel like that at the airport. I know, Benson said softly. But one day, maybe someone will see you, and instead of making assumptions, they'll remember your name. Not because of what I built, because of who you are. Tariq didn't respond right away. I drew her, by the way, he said eventually. Who? The woman from the gate. I drew her face, not mean or anything, just regular. I put her behind a desk and wrote the words, do better, on the glass window. Benson let that land. That's a good drawing. Yeah, I think I'll keep it. They said their goodnights, and the call ended. Benson sat quietly in the dark office for a moment longer. What happened at that gate wasn't rare. That was the part most people didn't understand. It wasn't a shock. It was a pattern. But patterns can be broken. Not with noise. With action. With naming things when it's easier to let them slide. With raising a son who knew how to stay composed when the ground shifted beneath him. Not everyone has the luxury of a father in the first-class lounge ready to step in. And that's why silence can't be an option. Not at airports, not at school, not anywhere. So, if you're watching this right now and thinking, I've seen something like this happen, or I've been Tariq, or even I've been quiet when I shouldn't have been, you're not alone. And that's the lesson here. Silence doesn't protect. It permits. And when people finally speak, really speak, systems start to shift. If this story moved you, share it. Not for views, for awareness, for accountability. And for every kid who's just trying to get to their seat without being treated like a problem. Subscribe if you believe respect should never depend on recognition. And next time you see something that doesn't sit right, don't look away. Say something. A quiet 12-year-old boy wandered a few steps away from his classmates to admire a parked plane. Minutes later, police were circling him until his mother arrived and everything flipped on its head. Malik Porter didn't talk much in class. He wasn't the kind of kid who raised his hand first or cracked jokes to get attention. But when his 7th grade teacher, Mrs. Dorsey, announced a field trip to Spokane Regional Airport, something lit up behind his eyes. For weeks, he counted down the days, scribbling the trip date on his notebook, talking about the planes he hoped to see, memorizing the specs of small aircraft most adults wouldn't even notice. That morning, he dressed carefully. White polo, dark jeans, sneakers just clean enough to pass his mom's inspection. Dr. Lenora Chase had kissed his forehead and said what she always said. "Stay curious, Malik. Ask smart questions." He nodded. Didn't say much, just smiled. That was his way. The school bus pulled up near the terminal just before 9:30 a.m. A volunteer from the airport's public relations team gave them all those bright orange visitor badges and a quick rundown of what to expect. Security briefings, a tour of the maintenance hangar, lunch in the break room above the concourse. Malik walked a little apart from the group, the way kids do when they're trying not to show how badly they want something. His eyes scanned the runway through the chain-link fence, then caught a single-engine Cessna 172, white with red trim, parked farther down near a row of other light aircraft. The plane looked peaceful, but powerful. He wanted to know what each switch inside that cockpit did. He wanted to sit in the pilot's seat and imagine liftoff. While the others clustered near the security gate, Malik edged forward a few extra steps. Not past the line, just far enough to get a better look. He didn't touch anything, didn't speak, just stared. About 30 yards away, behind the tinted glass of a private lounge, Greg Trumbull sipped his black coffee and frowned. The boy wasn't doing anything threatening, but something about the way he lingered near the planes didn't sit right with him. Greg had been a pilot for over 30 years, flew commercial until his knees gave out. Now he did occasional charter work and trained rookie flyers on weekends. He was old school, proud of it, and trusted his instincts. Maybe too much. He set the coffee down, reached for his phone, and dialed security. "There's a kid," he said. "Outside near the tarmac. Real close to my plane. Looks suspicious. You might want to send someone down." Within minutes, 2 uniformed airport security staff appeared at the gate. They approached Malik, asking him what he was doing, if he was with the school group, why he wasn't standing back with the others. Malik blinked, confused but polite. "I was just looking. I really like planes." The officers exchanged glances. One stepped aside and radioed local police. "Just for backup," he said. "Standard protocol." Across the way, Mrs. Dorsey noticed the growing tension and hurried over, her voice firm. "He's with us. He didn't do anything." But they weren't listening. Greg watched from inside. The boy was now flanked by 2 more men in blue. He felt a flicker of discomfort, but told himself it was better to be safe. After all, you couldn't be too careful these days. One of the officers started asking Malik if he had any ID. The boy's voice stayed steady, though it shook a little when he repeated his name and school. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said. "I just wanted to see the plane up close." But what started as a harmless school trip was about to spiral into something much bigger. The police car pulled up fast, tires pressing the curb hard as Officer Brandon Keene stepped out, adjusting his belt before walking toward the cluster by the fence. He wasn't in a bad mood, necessarily, but something about the radio call. Possible security concern involving an unsupervised juvenile near aircraft had already framed the situation in his head. Malik was still standing still, hands slightly out to his sides like he'd seen people do on TV when they didn't want trouble. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, one sneaker untied. His classmates were just beginning to notice something was wrong. "Kid, you got a parent with you?" Officer Keene asked. Malik shook his head. "I'm here with my school. They're right there." He pointed to the group now awkwardly huddled near the terminal entrance. Some of his classmates were staring. A few whispered, "You with them?" Keene turned to Mrs. Dorsey, who had stepped closer. "Ma'am?" "Yes," she said, stepping forward, voice tight. "This is Malik Porter. He's in my homeroom. He hasn't done anything wrong." Greg Trumbull had come outside now. He stood a few feet behind the officers, arms crossed, watching. He didn't say anything at first, but the posture was enough, like he was there to confirm something, to back someone up. His presence added weight. Another officer arrived, this one quieter, a little older. He stayed back, watching Keen's interaction with the boy. Security personnel radioed in that the area was clear, no breach of access, no signs of tampering. But the police didn't leave. They kept asking Malik the same questions in slightly different ways. Where were you standing? How close did you get? Did you touch anything? Why did you walk ahead of the group? Malik's voice started thinning out. He looked over at Mrs. Dorsey again, then at the other kids. One girl had pulled out her phone, recording quietly. Another boy whispered, "Dang, what did he even do?" Mrs. Dorsey tried again. "Officers, with all due respect, this is a child. He didn't cross any barriers. He didn't do anything dangerous." Officer Keen didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on Malik. Greg finally spoke. "I don't know what he was doing, but when I saw him from the lounge, it didn't look right. He was real close to the Cessna." Keen nodded slightly. "Appreciate the heads up, sir." To Malik, the moment felt unreal. His heart thudded like it did when he forgot a homework assignment. Only this time, it wasn't about a grade. It was about how they were looking at him. Like he wasn't supposed to be there. Like just standing near a plane made him dangerous. He kept quiet. Kept still. Mrs. Dorsey pulled out her phone. "I'm calling his mother," she said firmly. "Now." Down the road, a sleek black SUV turned into the airport parking lot. The tires didn't screech. The engine didn't roar. But something about the quiet arrival felt different. Inside the SUV, Dr. Lenora Chase was already removing her sunglasses. She hadn't answered on the first ring. She'd been in a virtual FAA meeting with regional directors. But when Mrs. Dorsey's name came through the second time in less than a minute, something in her gut told her to step out. Her son was in trouble. She didn't know how much, but enough that her voice had gone cold when she said to her assistant, "Reschedule everything. I'm going to Spokane Regional. Now." Dr. Chase was not tall, not loud. She didn't need to be. She walked with that kind of presence people don't fully notice until they're trying to figure out why the room just changed. She stepped through the terminal doors and scanned the open area, eyes quickly locking onto the group near the chain-link fence. She saw Malik, saw the officers, saw Greg. And something in her face, not anger, but something sharper, made one of the security guards instinctively step back. But none of them had any idea who was about to walk through that terminal door. Lenora didn't rush. She didn't need to. Every step was deliberate, eyes focused only on her son. Malik saw her before the officers did. Relief washed over his face, but he didn't move. He didn't want to do anything that would look suspicious. He'd already learned that even small movements could be read the wrong way. Dr. Chase walked up slowly and placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. Then she looked at Officer Keen. "I'm his mother," she said. Keen blinked. "And you are?" She reached into her blazer and calmly pulled out her credentials. Not a driver's license, not a staff ID. Her FAA identification badge. Gold letters, full clearance. "Dr. Lenora Chase, Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration." That hung in the air for a few seconds, long enough for the younger officer to glance at Keen, who was now trying to mask the fact that he was caught off guard. Greg, standing just a few feet away, stiffened. "FAA?" Keen asked, voice lower now. "As in Washington?" "Yes, as in D.C., as in the federal authority over everything that flies in and out of this country, including this airport, including that Cessna." Her eyes flicked toward Greg. "And including the way your security procedures are carried out." Greg's mouth opened like he had something to say, but no words came. She crouched slightly to Malik's level. "Are you okay, baby?" He nodded. "I didn't do anything. I was just looking at the plane." "I know," she said, brushing his shoulder gently. Then she stood, her gaze shifting back to Keen. "Tell me something, officer. If my son had blonde hair and freckles, Would we be standing here right now? Keen's lips parted like he might respond. But nothing came out. The question wasn't even accusatory, just flat. Tired. Greg stepped forward then, trying to reassert some kind of authority. Look, I didn't mean anything by it. I just saw a kid near my plane. I didn't know if— You didn't know, Lenora interrupted, turning to face him. But you assumed. Her tone hadn't changed. No shouting, no sarcasm, just clarity. You saw a young boy standing respectfully near a fence, and the first thing you did was pick up your phone. Not to ask questions, not to notify his teacher. You called security. Greg's face reddened. I've had issues before. Kids sneaking onto the ramp. It's a safety concern. Safety? She repeated. Let me ask you. How many 12-year-olds do you think have the skill set to hotwire a Cessna and take off down a runway? One of the officers chuckled softly, then looked down when Keen gave him a sharp look. Greg tried again. I didn't know who he was. He was close to the plane. I thought— You thought he didn't belong, she said, this time letting the silence stretch just a second longer. And you acted on that thought. That's the problem. Mrs. Dorsey finally stepped in, trying to ease the tension. Dr. Chase, we're all so sorry this happened. Malik's been nothing but respectful. The kids are upset. They don't understand what's going on. They shouldn't have to, Lenora said. He came here to learn, to be inspired. Instead, he's being taught to fear the spaces he dreams of working in. She looked at Greg again. Do you know how many times I've had to fight for the right to be in rooms like the one I came from this morning? Rooms full of men who think like you. And now, here we are. My son, 12 years old, already learning the cost of your assumptions. Greg didn't respond. He couldn't. The words hit somewhere he didn't expect. Malik stayed silent, but his eyes were locked on his mom. The way she spoke. The way nobody dared interrupt her. Lenora sighed and gently placed her hand on her son's back. We're leaving now, she said. But this isn't over. But that revelation was just the beginning of a very uncomfortable conversation. The group slowly moved toward the terminal building. Dr. Chase walked ahead with Malik, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Behind them, Officer Keen and his partner exchanged quiet words with the security guards, now clearly unsure of their own footing. Greg Trumbull didn't follow. He stood a few paces away, watching, arms folded, not out of confidence now, but uncertainty. Inside the small conference room just off the main hallway, Lenora asked for privacy. Mrs. Dorsey stayed with the other students, while the assistant airport director, 2 officers, Tsar, and Greg entered the room with her. Malik sat in a chair against the wall, quiet but alert. Dr. Chase remained standing. Before I say anything, she began, I want each of you to take a minute and ask yourself what you honestly thought you saw this morning. No one spoke. I don't need rehearsed apologies or PR-safe answers. I'm not here to make this go away quietly. I want to talk about what really happened out there and what it represents. Greg shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. I just called it in because I saw someone I didn't recognize near the aircraft. Someone, she repeated. Not a threat, not a trespasser, just someone. He rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I wasn't trying to start something, but you did. And it started the moment you didn't ask a single question before dialing security. What would have happened if I hadn't shown up when I did? The room fell silent again. Keen spoke up this time, trying to redirect. We're trained to respond to calls like that with caution. We didn't touch the boy, we didn't detain him. But you treated him like a problem, she said firmly. You questioned a child standing near a fence at an educational event as if he were casing the runway. Officer Keen's voice dropped. We're sorry. I didn't realize who he was. You don't need to realize who he is, she said sharply. That's the point. You don't get to treat someone with respect only after you find out who they're connected to. Malik shifted in his seat, watching the adults speak around him. Greg spoke again, quieter this time. I think I messed up. Dr. Chase finally looked at him. I don't think you're a bad man, Mr. Trumbull, but I do think you've lived long enough with your instincts unchallenged. And that's dangerous. Greg's jaw clenched. His hands were locked together in front of him. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially not in a room where he once held the most experience. But there was no defense left. No protocol to fall back on. I see young people like my son every day, Dr. Chase continued. Smart, curious, hungry to learn. And I know exactly what it takes for them to stay that way in a world that tells them, subtly and loudly, that they're out of place. She paused, then turned slightly toward the officers. It's not enough to avoid overt harm. You have to stop normalizing the suspicion. You can't teach safety if your definition of danger is based on familiarity and bias. No one interrupted. There was nothing to say. Finally, she looked down at Malik. You okay, baby? He nodded. I just wanted to see the plane. Greg's eyes dropped to the floor. Lenora turned to the room one last time. You all owe my son something far more valuable than an apology. You owe him the right to feel like he belongs in spaces like this. She gathered her things, thanked Mrs. Dorsey outside, and walked with Malik toward the exit. The school bus was waiting, but Lenora would be driving him home. Not because he was shaken, but because she needed him close that day. Inside the building, Greg remained seated in the empty room long after they left. But the aftermath wouldn't just end at the airport that day. By that evening, the story had already found its way online. The video a student recorded, barely 2 minutes long, opened with Malik standing between two officers, head down, while a woman's voice off-screen whispered, "He didn't do anything." The clip didn't show any shouting, no violence, just a child surrounded by uniforms and the quiet tension of something that should have never happened. But the moment Dr. Lenora Chase walked into frame and identified herself, that changed everything. Someone uploaded the footage with the caption, "Boy harassed at airport for looking at plane. Then his mom shows up. She runs the FSA, sir." Within hours, it had over 700,000 views. Comments poured in. She handled that with more grace than most of us would have. That boy didn't even flinch. Kids like him grow up knowing how to move carefully. Imagine being that pilot right now. Respect to Dr. Chase. She didn't yell. She educated the room. News outlets reached out quickly. ABC, NPR, even international channels. FAA's media office scrambled to coordinate statements. And although Dr. Chase declined interviews, the agency released a short, pointed message. Our administrator responded to an incident involving her child today. We are reviewing the circumstances internally. The FAA remains committed to equity in access to aviation spaces. It was the most restrained version of what really happened, and yet it lit up the headlines. At the airport, Greg Trumbull couldn't avoid the fallout. His name hadn't been in the video, but local pilots knew. One posted a short blog post titled "When Fear Trumps Curiosity," which mentioned Greg by first name. It was just enough to start the conversations. People didn't cancel him, not fully. But they did begin to question how often situations like that happened, and just never made it to video. One morning, Greg walked into a training session he normally led and found someone else running it. No explanation, just a quiet shift. He understood. In his gut, he knew he'd triggered something larger than he was ready for. Malik, meanwhile, tried to go back to normal. But how do you do that when your face is all over the internet? Teachers treated him more cautiously, too cautiously. Friends asked awkward questions, some out of concern, others out of curiosity. At lunch, a classmate asked if he was going to be famous now. Malik shrugged and said, "I'd rather just be a pilot." Dr. Chase kept things steady at home. She cooked a little more that week, sat at the table longer, asked about his classes, and didn't check emails during dinner. One night, she knocked gently on Malik's bedroom door. "Can I come in?" He was at his desk, drawing a jet with a sharp pencil. "Yeah," he said, spinning slowly in his chair. "I got a letter today," she said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "From Mr. Trumbull." Malik's eyes lifted. "What did he say?" "He apologized," she said. "A real apology. Not a PR one. Said he'd been thinking a lot since that day. Said he's been wrong before, but this time it really stuck with him." Malik didn't say anything at first. "Is he in trouble?" "Not the kind that involves handcuffs," she replied. The kind that makes you sit with your own reflection a little too long. He gave a quiet laugh, the first real one in days. Dr. Chase continued. He asked if there was a way to make things right. I haven't answered yet. Maybe he could do something for other kids. Malik said after a pause. Not for me. For kids who don't think they belong. Lenora looked at her son like she was seeing something brand new in him. That's a good idea. But what mattered most wasn't the headlines. It was what happened behind the scenes. 3 weeks later, Greg Trumbull walked into a small community event held at the Airway Heights Municipal Hangar just outside Spokane. The banner above the entrance read, Youth in Aviation. Imagine the Skies. FAA Mentorship Program. He wasn't scheduled to speak. He hadn't even planned to attend, not until he received a personal invitation signed by Dr. Lenora Chase. He thought about ignoring it. Thought maybe it'd be better to stay quiet and let things fade. But something kept pulling at him. An ache to make things right, not just with words, but with presence. Inside, the space had been transformed. Tables with flight simulators lined one side, poster boards explaining different careers in aviation on the other. Kids ranging from 10 to 16 rotated through stations, eyes wide, hands busy. Most of them had never been inside an aircraft hangar before. Greg stood off to the side, unsure where to go. Then he saw her, Dr. Chase, standing beside a group of teenage girls as they tested out a flight control panel. She looked relaxed, proud. She saw Greg the same moment and gave a short nod. Nothing more, but it was enough to let him know she hadn't forgotten. 10 minutes later, she walked over. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said. I wasn't sure either, he replied, his voice low. They stood in silence for a beat. I read your letter, she said. I appreciated the honesty. I meant every word, he said. I've done a lot of thinking. I can't take back what happened, but I'd like to help open this space to more kids, especially the ones I never pictured here before. Lenora tilted her head slightly. You mean the ones you once saw as outsiders? Greg looked away, nodding. Yeah, she didn't make it easy. But she didn't shut the door either. There's a group speaking at 3, she said. High schoolers building their first glider. We could use someone to explain stall recovery if you're up for it. He blinked. You want me to? You asked to help, she said simply. Here's your chance. Greg nodded. Not out of pride, out of willingness. An hour later, he stood in front of 12 teens holding notebooks and wide eyes. He explained concepts like lift and drag, then paused when a girl raised her hand and asked if flying scared him the first time. He smiled. Yeah, scared me a lot. But the cockpit doesn't care who's nervous. It only cares if you're prepared. That answer landed. Back near the entryway, Malik watched the exchange from behind a table stacked with brochures. He didn't walk over, didn't interrupt, but he saw Greg talking to the kids, really talking, listening too. Later that afternoon, Greg approached him. Malik, he said. The boy looked up, cautious but calm. I owe you something. I didn't see you clearly that day, and that's my fault, not yours. Malik nodded, still silent. Greg offered a hesitant smile. You're the kind of kid who's going to change a lot of minds someday. Malik gave a small shrug. I just like planes, Greg chuckled. That's a pretty good place to start. Back inside the hangar, the FAA's mentorship program was gathering momentum. Dr. Chase had arranged for local aviation schools to send representatives. They were offering scholarships now, real ones, the kind Malik would be eligible for in a few years. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever really fixed a moment like that. But this was something more than cleanup. It was movement. Forward. Mutual. Greg stayed after the event, helping pack up tables, talking to staff, asking about future sessions. He didn't need to be convinced anymore. He just needed to keep showing up. But the real lesson wasn't about redemption. It was about responsibility. 3 months later, Malik sat cross-legged on the carpet of his school library, surrounded by a small group of classmates. A sign on the door read, Aviation Club, Wednesdays after school. What started as a quiet idea after the field trip had grown into something real. Real enough that the principal helped them find a space, and real enough that the school counselor arranged a surprise video chat last week with an Air Force pilot who looked just like Malik. The room wasn't fancy, just a few beanbags, donated model planes, and hand-me-down posters. But for the dozen kids who showed up every week, it felt like something important. Malik adjusted the controls on the flight simulator laptop they'd borrowed from a local STEM nonprofit. A sixth grader beside him asked how many hours a pilot needed to fly a commercial plane. 1,500, Malik said confidently, not even looking up. But you can start training way before that. He spoke differently now. Not louder, just clearer. The hesitation was gone. Across town, Dr. Chase sat in a conference room in Seattle, reviewing proposals for a new FAA initiative, Aerospace Access. Her plan was bold. Bring aviation education to middle schools in underserved communities across the country, not just as electives, but as core curriculum. Real tools, real mentorship, real access. She was pushing the agency harder than some liked, but she'd stopped apologizing for that years ago. Later that evening, back at home, she found Malik on the couch sketching a Boeing 737 from memory. "You're getting good at those," she said, peering over his shoulder. "I want to build one someday," he said. "Not just fly it." She sat beside him, brushing a crumb off his sleeve. "You will," she said. "And more." He looked at her for a moment. "Do you think Mr. Trumbull's different now?" She paused. "I think he's trying. And sometimes trying is the first real thing people do that matters." Malik thought about that for a second. "Some people only see what they expect to see." She smiled faintly. "And that's why you show them more." The house was quiet. No headlines, no reporters, just a mother and son sharing a moment that didn't need explanation. Elsewhere, Greg Trumbull was getting ready for a weekend youth workshop. He'd volunteered to bring 3 aircraft manuals and 2 demo radios. He was still learning how to speak differently, how to listen better. But he kept showing up. He'd stopped seeing kids like Malik as question marks and started seeing them as mirrors. Reminders of what the industry could be if people stopped guarding the gate and started opening the door. And while the world had moved on from the viral moment, the ripples were still there, quiet, steady. Kids now knew the name Lenora Chase. They saw someone who looked like them in charge of the skies. And for many, that was the first time they realized this path wasn't someone else's lane. It could be theirs. Malik didn't need to be famous. He didn't need the spotlight. He just needed space to grow without having to defend why he was standing there in the first place. The moral wasn't just about race or airports or protocol. It was about the power of pause, the moment before you act, where you choose to assume the best in someone, not the worst. That moment can save a childhood or change a future. So the next time you're in a position to judge, to call, to act, ask yourself, am I making this choice out of caution or out of fear disguised as instinct? Because one will protect, the other can destroy. If this story moved you, share it, reflect on it, and if you haven't already, subscribe. We tell real stories here, stories that make us better, one truth at a time. They laughed at a quiet boy for saying his dad was in special forces. Even the cop joined in. But when the truth walked through the school doors in full uniform, the silence said everything. It started over mashed potatoes and chocolate milk. Kendrick Mays was sitting at the edge of Table 6 in the Jefferson Middle School cafeteria in Fresno, California. He had his tray, his earbuds in, and his mouth shut. Just like every other day. That's how he liked it. Blend in, finish lunch, go back to class. No waves, no noise. Just another day to get through without being noticed too much. But today, someone noticed. "Hey, Kendrick," called out Tyson Green, a wiry 7th grader with a busted backpack and way too much energy. "Heard you tell Ms. Ledbetter your dad's some big-time soldier or whatever. Like, special forces? Kendrick didn't answer at first. He looked at Tyson, then at the handful of other kids watching. So what? You just gonna sit there and act like that's normal? Tyson said louder. You lying or what? More eyes turned to him. A few smirks. Kendrick sighed through his nose and took out one earbud. I'm not lying, he said quietly. He's in the special forces. There was a short silence, just long enough for people to lean in, and then the laughter started. Loud, sharp, mean. Even some kids who didn't know Kendrick joined in. That was the kind of school this was. If someone else was the target, you laughed to stay off the radar. From across the room, the school resource officer, Deputy Rick Callahan, leaned back in his chair. He was chewing gum and checking his phone, but caught the noise. He stood up and walked over, probably expecting to break up a fight. What's going on here? He asked in that flat, uninterested voice he used when he already didn't care about the answer. Nothing, Tyson said, grinning. Just asking Kendrick about his dad. Says he's special forces or something. Callahan looked down at Kendrick, then scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Special forces? Really? He chuckled. Yeah, and my uncle's James Bond. That got the biggest laugh of all. The officer's voice carried. Some kids banged the table. A few even clapped. Kendrick just stared at his food. Callahan gave Kendrick a dismissive pat on the shoulder. Come on, man. You don't gotta make stuff up to impress people. Kendrick didn't say a word. He picked up his fork, his hands stiff. He felt every set of eyes on him, every whisper. His ears burned, his jaw clenched, but he wouldn't let them see it. Wouldn't give them that. He thought about standing up, thought about saying something. But what? That his dad had scars on his back from a helicopter crash overseas? That he never talked about his missions but always came home with this far-off look in his eyes? That his dad didn't post it on Facebook because people in his line of work couldn't? They wouldn't believe him? Nobody at Jefferson Middle ever did. Deputy Callahan walked off, still chuckling to himself. Kids started returning to their own conversations. The moment had passed. For them. Not for Kendrick. He put his earbud back in. He'd finished the lunch. He always did. But he couldn't taste anything. Just rubbery chicken and dry air. And across the cafeteria, someone pulled out their phone, already typing something about Kendrick the Spy Kid. It would be on Instagram before the bell rang. But what no one expected was how quickly everything would flip. Jefferson Middle wasn't a bad school. Not on paper anyway. It had clean halls, recycled air, and a principal who sent out motivational quotes every Monday morning. But for Kendrick Mays, it felt more like a cold, slow drip, day after day, small things piling up until you just stopped caring. Kendrick had figured out the system early. Keep your head down, stay quiet. Don't give anyone a reason to remember your name. He didn't raise his hand unless he knew the answer was bulletproof. He walked the same path from homeroom to math, to gym, to English and back, keeping close to the wall. Not because he was scared, he just didn't see the point in drawing attention. That lunchroom moment had spread faster than he thought. By third period, 2 kids tried to trip him in the hallway. By gym, someone whispered, "Green Beret Jr." when he missed a free throw. Even Coach Benning laughed a little, not cruelly, just the kind of tired adult laugh that said, "Come on, kid." What hurt more was how normal it felt. Like the second you were different, even a little, people felt entitled to put you in your place. Ms. Ledbetter, his English teacher, asked him to stay behind after class. She looked at him over her glasses, her mouth doing that tight little smile teachers give when they think they're being kind. "Kendrick, is everything okay at home?" He blinked. "Yeah, I just heard there was an incident at lunch. I want you to know you're safe here. If your father isn't really in the—" "He is," Kendrick said firmly. Ms. Ledbetter paused. "All right, I just wanted to check in." He walked out before she could say anything else. Every word felt like a layer of disbelief being stacked on top of him. No one believed him. And they didn't have to. He wasn't looking for validation. His dad always told him that truth didn't need applause. "Real ones don't talk loud," Dorian Mays had said once, while fixing a loose cabinet door in their tiny kitchen. Loud men are usually lying. That was 6 months ago. Kendrick remembered how his dad said it without even looking up from the screwdriver. Just calm, steady. Like he was teaching Kendrick how to be steel without ever saying the word. He never got long stretches with his dad, sometimes just a few days between deployments. The house got quieter after he left, but Kendrick didn't mind. His mum was solid, worked double shifts at the urgent care, and never forgot to check his homework. But it was those short, powerful moments with his father that stuck. He remembered one morning sitting on the porch while it rained. Dorian handed him a small folding knife. Not to use, just to hold. "Balance matters," he said. "Not just in your hand. In here, too." He tapped Kendrick's chest. None of that fit in a lunchtime joke. None of it translated through cafeteria rumors. Kids didn't care about inner balance or truth. They cared about who could roast you the best. Kendrick didn't want to be tough. He wanted to be invisible again. But that afternoon had lit something in him. Not anger. Not yet. Just heat under the surface. He sat in math class, fingers curled into his hoodie sleeves, the corners of his notebook filled with scratch marks. The numbers on the board blurred. His leg bounced under the desk. All he wanted was to finish the day. That's when his classroom door opened. Mrs. Castillo stepped in from the hallway and leaned toward his teacher, whispering something. The teacher glanced at Kendrick, then nodded. "Kendrick," she said, "you're being checked out. Grab your things." Checked out? That never happened. His mom was working a double, and his dad wasn't supposed to be back for another month. Confused, he stuffed his books into his bag and walked toward the door. Mrs. Castillo didn't say much, just gestured for him to follow. Still, that one afternoon would change how they all saw him. Outside, the sky had dimmed. Not dark, but that weird in-between time where shadows start to stretch longer than they should. Kendrick followed Mrs. Castillo through the main corridor toward the front office, still trying to piece together who could possibly be checking him out. His mom would have called, unless something happened. His chest tightened at the thought. He turned a corner and froze. Through the front glass, parked right in front of the building, sat a black SUV. The kind that didn't belong in a school parking lot. Not flashy, but official. Tires still ticking with heat. Doors shut tight. Standing beside it was a man in full uniform. Kendrick stopped walking. The hall felt smaller somehow, quieter. Like the noise of the building hadn't followed him here. He knew that stance, the way his dad stood when he was on, back straight, boots planted, eyes scanning like nothing ever surprised him, but everything mattered. Uniform pressed, sleeves crisp. His name patch. Mays, barely visible through the glass. Kendrick's stomach flipped. His dad wasn't supposed to be back. Not yet. Inside the main office, Master Sergeant Dorian Mays stood calmly at the counter, speaking with the secretary. He wasn't smiling. He never smiled much in public, but he didn't need to. The man carried presence like weight on his shoulders. Heavy, unmoving. "I'm here for my son," he said, voice low but firm. "Kendrick Mays. He's in 8th grade. The secretary looked flustered. "Oh, yes, sir. Just a moment. I'll call someone from the office to bring him up." But she didn't need to, because Deputy Rick Callahan, standing a few feet away by the coffee machine, had already turned around. At first he didn't recognize Dorian, just saw the uniform and raised an eyebrow. He walked over with the same half-smirk he wore earlier. "You military?" he asked. Dorian didn't blink. "Yes." "What branch?" "Army. Special Forces." Callahan gave a short laugh, like he thought he was still in on some inside joke. "You got ID?" Dorian slowly reached into his jacket, pulled out his military ID, and handed it over without a word. Callahan glanced at it, and the smirk fell from his face. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sharp, like the air shifted, like gravity got heavier in that tiny room. "You're Kendrick's father?" Callahan asked. more careful now. Yes. Callahan cleared his throat. He mentioned you today. I didn't realize. Dorian cut in, voice still even. No reason you would. Most people don't. He took back his ID, pocketed it, and offered his hand. There was something about the way he held it out. Not threatening, not warm, just direct, firm, solid. Callahan hesitated, just for a second, then shook it. Dorian's grip was calm but unflinching. A handshake like steel. Callahan's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. His eyes dropped. Shoulders stiffened. That moment of forced eye contact passed, and he stepped back. The secretary buzzed the classroom. Outside the glass doors, Kendrick watched the whole thing. He didn't move at first, just stared at his dad. Not because he didn't believe it, but because it didn't make sense. Why now? Why today? Then Dorian turned toward the door. Their eyes met, and just like that, everything else faded. For the first time all day, Kendrick didn't feel small. He walked into the office, slowly, like his body needed to catch up to what his mind already knew. Dad? Dorian gave a small nod. You ready? Kendrick's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the secretary, at Deputy Callahan, now pretending to read something on the wall. He turned back. Yeah. His dad picked up his backpack, tossed it over his own shoulder like it weighed nothing. We've got a couple days, Dorian said. Wanted to grab you early. Thought we could hit Yosemite before I go back. Kendrick didn't smile, but his eyes said everything. He followed his dad out the door, but it wasn't just the sight of Dorian that caught their attention. It was what happened next. As the glass door closed behind them, Kendrick felt the air shift. Cooler, quieter, more grounded. It wasn't the breeze or the fading sun, it was his dad. Just being near him always had that effect, like Kendrick had been holding his breath all day without realizing it, and now he could finally exhale. The black SUV sat idle in front of the school. Nothing fancy. Government issued. The same kind of vehicle Kendrick remembered riding in once before, during a brief visit to Fort Bragg. Dorian walked toward it, his boots hitting the pavement in that controlled, even rhythm. Kendrick followed silently, eyes forward. Behind them, the office door opened again. Kendrick! A voice called out. It was Deputy Callahan. Dorian turned around before Kendrick could answer. Callahan stepped forward, hands loosely at his sides like he wasn't sure what to do with them. He glanced at Kendrick, then locked eyes with Dorian. That same unease, the one he tried to hide, flickered in his expression. I didn't mean to, earlier, Callahan said. Didn't realize. Dorian's voice cut in, not sharp, just steady. You don't need to finish that sentence. Callahan opened his mouth, closed it again. Dorian walked a few steps closer. You thought my son was lying. Because what he said didn't fit your idea of what's believable coming from someone like him. Callahan shifted on his feet. I didn't mean, but you did, Dorian said calmly. You meant it enough to laugh. Kendrick stood still, watching. This wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was something colder, stronger. His dad didn't need to yell. He didn't need to curse. He just looked the man in the eyes and told the truth, and it hit harder than anything else could. Callahan looked at Kendrick again, the usual authority in his voice gone. Look, kid, I shouldn't have said what I said, he muttered. You said your dad's special forces. I should have listened. Kendrick didn't answer. He just stared. Not angry, just present. And that silence made Callahan shift again. Dorian placed a hand on Kendrick's shoulder. You good? Kendrick nodded once. A real one this time. They turned toward the SUV, and Dorian opened the passenger door for his son. Before getting in, Kendrick glanced back. Callahan hadn't moved. His arms were crossed now, but his face wasn't smug. It was different. Quiet. Like he was still processing something too big to joke about. Dorian got behind the wheel and pulled out smoothly. The car rolled past the school building, where a few kids were still lingering near the entrance. Some recognized Kendrick, eyes wide as they took in the uniform, the insignia, the way Kendrick climbed into the car like it was nothing. Kendrick didn't wave, didn't smirk, just stared straight ahead. Inside the SUV it was silent for a minute. Then Dorian spoke, eyes still on the road. "Heard what happened today?" Kendrick blinked. "Who told you?" "Your mom called," Dorian said. "Said someone humiliated you in front of the whole cafeteria. Said a grown man laughed at you." Kendrick looked out the window. "It wasn't the first time." Dorian gripped the wheel tighter. "It better be the last." They rode in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was solid, like the ground after a storm. "I don't care what they say," Kendrick said finally. "I know who you are." Dorian glanced at him, then back at the road. "You don't need to defend me," he said. "You just need to stand in your truth. Let them catch up." Kendrick didn't reply, but the knot in his chest loosened just a little. But Kendrick still had no idea his dad was even coming. The road out of town stretched wide and empty, dotted with eucalyptus trees and old gas stations. Kendrick stared out the window, still trying to make sense of the last hour. His dad being back was one thing, but showing up like that, in uniform, in front of everyone, that wasn't like him. Dorian rarely talked about his job. What he did, where he went. There were rules, of course, but even beyond that, he never seemed interested in the glory. The man didn't even own a single social media account. "You hungry?" Dorian asked, eyes still on the road. Kendrick gave a small shrug. "Kind of." Dorian nodded and took the next exit. They pulled into a roadside diner called Pete's Grill on the edge of Madeira. Kendrick had never been there before, but Dorian seemed to know the place. Inside, it smelled like bacon grease and lemon-scented cleaner. A few truckers sat at the counter. No one looked up when they walked in. They sat in a booth by the window. A waitress brought water and menus, smiling politely but without the small talk. "You get anything you want?" Dorian said, flipping open his own menu. Kendrick ordered pancakes and sausage. Dorian went with black coffee and an omelette. When the waitress walked off, the silence settled again. This time, Kendrick broke it. "Why'd you come back early?" Dorian leaned back. "Because I heard you needed me. But you're leaving again soon, right?" 2 days. Kendrick nodded, playing with his straw wrapper. "I didn't expect you to show up like that," he said, looking up. "I thought you'd just call or wait until you were home." Dorian's jaw flexed slightly, not in anger, just in thought. "Sometimes showing up says more than words," he said. Kendrick thought about that. How everyone had stared when his dad walked in. How the laughter died so fast you could hear it hit the floor. "You didn't have to say anything to him," Kendrick said. "To that cop." "I could have handled it." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "You shouldn't have had to. I'm used to it. I don't want you to be." They sat quietly again. Outside, a semi rolled past with a low rumble. "Son," Dorian said after a moment, "being underestimated will follow you. It doesn't stop when you grow up. But how you respond to it, that's yours. You don't owe them explanations. Just proof." Kendrick sipped his water, his mind still turning. "I didn't even think they'd believe me," he said. "I didn't come for them," Dorian replied. "I came for you." The food arrived. They ate in silence, like they always did when they were together. No rush, no pressure to fill space. Kendrick hadn't realized how much he missed that until now. His father's calm made the noise from school feel miles away. Midway through his pancakes, Kendrick looked up. "You ever get tired of people doubting you?" "All the time," Dorian said. "But I don't carry their doubt. That's their weight, not mine." Kendrick smiled slightly. "You sound like Mom." Dorian smirked for the first time all day. "Well, she's usually right." The waitress brought the check. Dorian paid in cash, left a generous tip. As they walked back to the SUV, Kendrick glanced at him sideways. "You ever scare people on purpose?" Dorian chuckled under his breath. "No, but I don't fix their fear, either." Kendrick opened the car door, hesitating before climbing in. "I'm glad you came." Dorian looked at him, his expression softening just a little. "So am I." They pulled back onto the road, headed toward Yosemite. No music, no news radio. just the quiet understanding between two people who didn't need many words to feel known. Kendrick looked at the world passing outside his window, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. But even as they walked out, Kendrick didn't realize the message his dad just left behind. Monday morning came like it always did. Alarm buzzing at 6:30, the same peanut butter toast, the same slow walk to the bus stop. But something in Kendrick's chest felt different now. Lighter, maybe. Or just less heavy. He hadn't said much to anyone over the weekend. He and his dad had spent 2 full days hiking around Yosemite, talking about random things. Music, books, old memories. Nothing heavy. Nothing forced. Just time. Real time. And when Kendrick stepped onto that school bus Monday morning, he didn't expect anything to be different. But it was. It started with the way the kids looked at him. Not mocking, not icy. Just unsure. Like they weren't sure what to do with the version of Kendrick that had walked out of school last week beside a man who looked like he commanded storms. In first period, Tyson Green didn't make eye contact. He kept his voice low, even skipped his usual routine of poking at Kendrick's sneakers or mumbling smart remarks when the teacher turned around. By lunch, word had spread. Some kids were still whispering, sure, but it was different. No jokes this time. Just questions. Curious stares. No one called him Spy Kid. No one laughed when he sat down. Even Coach Benning, who rarely noticed anything beyond the scoreboard, gave Kendrick a weird half-wave in the hallway. But the biggest change came during 5th period. Deputy Callahan walked into Kendrick's science class. Heads turned. Teachers usually sent for kids through the office. It was strange to see the officer come in himself. "Can I borrow Kendrick for a second?" Callahan said. The teacher nodded, confused. Kendrick stood slowly and followed him into the hall. They stood in silence for a moment. Callahan rubbed the back of his neck like he wasn't used to apologizing. "I was wrong the other day," he said, eyes flicking to the floor. "I shouldn't have said what I said about your dad." Kendrick didn't reply. He didn't need to. Callahan nodded. "That handshake. Your old man's the real deal. It shows." Kendrick looked him straight in the eye. "I know." There wasn't much more to say. Callahan cleared his throat, gave a stiff nod, and walked away. Later that week, during lunch, one of the quieter kids from Kendrick's math class, Jalen Ruiz, walked over. He looked nervous, holding his tray with both hands. "Hey," Jalen said, glancing around. "Mind if I sit here?" Kendrick shrugged. "Sure." Jalen sat down slowly, like he wasn't sure if it was a trap. He poked at his spaghetti, then finally asked, "So your dad's like actual special forces?" "Yeah," Kendrick said. Jalen hesitated. "That's cool. I mean, I didn't think you were lying or anything. You don't have to explain," Jalen nodded. They didn't talk much after that, but it was something. And that was how it started. Not a flood, just tiny shifts. A teacher who looked at him a little differently. A kid who didn't laugh quite as loudly. Small acknowledgements that maybe, just maybe, they'd misjudged him. Kendrick didn't strut through the hallways. He wasn't about to change who he was. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he had to shrink either. That night, as he sat at the dinner table with his mom, she slid her phone across the table. It was a photo. Someone from school had snapped it, Kendrick and his dad walking out of the office. Dorian's uniform sharp against the light. Kendrick just a step behind. "It's been going around," she said. Kendrick stared at it for a moment. "Why do people need proof so bad?" he asked. His mom smiled softly. "Because some folks only believe what they can see. But that doesn't make the truth any less real." But this story isn't really about one day. It's about what people assume. Weeks passed. Life at Jefferson Middle started to smooth back into its usual rhythm. Pop quizzes, hallway drama, the bell ringing 5 minutes too late when you're starving. But for Kendrick Mays, something had changed that hadn't gone unnoticed. He still sat in the back of the classroom, still kept his voice low. but there was a new kind of quiet around him. Not the kind that pushed him aside, but the kind that gave space. Respect, maybe, or just recognition. People didn't stop him in the halls or ask him to tell stories about his dad. That wasn't the kind of school this was. But teachers spoke to him like they finally saw him. Like he wasn't invisible anymore. Like what he said mattered. He never mentioned the cafeteria incident again. He didn't need to. The people who laughed the loudest remembered it. So did the ones who watched and stayed silent. Tyson Green never apologized. But he never joked again either. And sometimes that's the only apology people like that know how to give. One afternoon after school, Kendrick was walking past the gym when he saw something unexpected. Deputy Callahan, standing by the vending machine, nodded toward him. Kendrick stopped. I meant what I said the other day, Callahan muttered. About your dad and you. Kendrick didn't smile. But he didn't look away either. You don't have to keep saying it, he said. Callahan paused. You remind me of him. Kendrick tilted his head. You don't even know him. Callahan gave a slow breath through his nose. Don't need to. You walked through a whole room of people laughing and didn't say a word. That takes more strength than most adults I know. Kendrick gave a small nod, then kept walking. He wasn't looking for praise, but it felt like something had finally shifted in that man. At home that night, Kendrick sat across from his mom at the dinner table. She was grading papers, sipping tea. The house felt quieter without his dad around again, but Kendrick didn't feel the absence like before. What's on your mind? She asked without looking up. Kendrick leaned back in his chair. Do you think people change? She set her pen down, looked at him for a moment. Some do, she said. But most just see things they hadn't noticed before. Kendrick thought about that. Thought about the look on Callahan's face when he realized who he was talking to. Thought about the kids who used to laugh at him, now choosing to say nothing at all. Maybe it wasn't change. Maybe it was clarity. Maybe people just needed to be reminded that everyone's story is bigger than the small version they invent in their heads. That night, Kendrick sat at his desk and opened a notebook he hadn't touched in months. He wrote 3 sentences, then paused. My dad doesn't wear a cape. He doesn't need to. He just shows up. And that's enough. Some people need proof. I've had mine my whole life. He closed the notebook. Let it sit. Because sometimes the lesson doesn't come with fireworks or applause. Sometimes it's a man who walks into a room, doesn't say much, and leaves the whole place changed. Kendrick didn't need to be louder. He just needed to remember what mattered. And maybe someone watching this right now needs to hear the same thing. Don't let their assumptions define you. Let your truth do the talking. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone in your life who carries strength quietly, take a second to hit subscribe. These stories matter, and they deserve to be told. Because the world doesn't always listen to the quiet ones, but maybe it should.